Hi, I'm Ali Jackson-Jolley. I'm here with Judie Saunders, who is a litigator with an expertise in sexual misconduct and assault cases. Judie, welcome, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I wanted to have you in to talk with me about the verdict that came out on Monday around the Jonathan Majors case, in which a jury found him guilty. And so I was hoping that you would sort of walk us through the charges and the verdict, so our viewers could understand what, as a seasoned litigator, you saw happening there.
Sure. So the case involves Jonathan Majors, a very popular Hollywood actor. He plays I believe it's an action figure or personality in one of the Marvel movies. And recently, a New York State jury found him guilty of misdemeanor charges. They found him guilty of two charges. One, a charge of assault, and a second charge for harassment. And those charges were based on a number of pieces of evidence, not only the testimony of the former girlfriend of Mr. Majors, but then they also had videotapes. There were also photos of injuries. I believe it was to her finger, to her ear, and based on that testimony, and what wasn't included in that testimony was Mr. Majors testifying on his behalf. So we didn't have that piece of evidence, but based on the testimony and based on the demonstrative evidence, they returned a verdict of guilty. How do I think that they got to that conclusion? I think that the prosecution put on a very persuasive case. We know that in criminal prosecutions versus, say, when you're civilly prosecuting a case, the standard or the burden is on the people, is on the government. They have to show guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And because of this verdict, we know that that was done. And what I found most compelling, or what likely was compelling to the jury, was to actually see the videotapes after Mr. Majors and the ex-girlfriend exited the car. What you saw were depictions of Mr. Majors. It looked like he was attempting to kind of throw her back in the car, get her back in the car. It's my understanding that just prior to seeing these videotapes, what the jury would have heard is that there was a text message that came up on his phone that the ex-girlfriend saw, and that started a verbal dispute. And I believe she took his phone. He tried to get it back from him, and then you see what happens outside of the car. Now, what's important about the jury's verdict is that there are several different types of assaults that could be charged. And actually, the government did charge him with two types of assault. They had charged him with intentional, which means that you have to have a specific mens rea or mental state, so to speak. They also charged with reckless, and it's the reckless assault. That's what he was found guilty of. And I believe that's based on that videotape where the actions, they didn't believe that he intentionally hurt, but more so recklessly hurt.
And so, okay, that makes sense. And so it's hard not to, obviously Jonathan Majors is a celebrity, as you mentioned, known for being a Marvel villain, also for being in Lovecraft County, and a really, I think, more than up and coming actor. He had arrived, and it's hard not to draw the conclusions then to a case that we watched play out in the news a while back, which was the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case, in which that was almost like watching reality television. The public was so enthralled by it. But the thing that seems similar about these two cases is that very early in the Johnny Depp Amber Heard case, the so-called public court of appeals, social media, was very, very supportive of Mr. Depp. The majority of, at least, the folks on social media that were active were saying that he was innocent. And similarly, the Jonathan Majors case, social media, again, public court of appeal, not a legal court of appeal, but really felt that Jonathan Majors was innocent and were worried that he was going to be convicted. Can I ask you, do you think that, can you talk to me about why you think, when it comes to celebrities at least, there's this sort of public reaction to dismiss the alleged abuse, and there's this, I guess, support of the alleged perpetrator?
There is always going to be an uphill battle and a struggle. If you are a survivor, if you're alleging any type of abuse, be it physical, sexual, against a known personality. The reason why is because the public on a whole, from working in this area, in this field, your first inclination, you don't want to believe that someone that you see on the screen, someone that maybe portrayed a role or was portrayed in a movie that you can relate to, did something horrible. The first instinct is to know that's not it. I got to put this into context. This is not the story. There is a knee-jerk gut, and I'm sure that psychology probably has a medical term for it. But if survivors, victims coming forward, it's going to be an uphill battle. So that's the first thing, because there is that relatability. You relate to that star. You relate to that authority figure. You don't want it to be true. Then what you see is, as pieces of evidence are revealed, whether it's statements that are put to the press, maybe there is some type of softening in that on the part of the public opinion. Well, maybe something happened is what you'll hear, but that's not the whole story. In my opinion, and this is anecdotally, of course, I don't have any, statistics. Anecdotally, what I have seen is that the balance usually weighs in favor of the star, the personality, the celebrity. In the Johnny Depp case, I remember watching footage of when he was coming to the courtroom, and you had throngs of people yelling, it's okay, we support you, we love you. That has got to be absolutely rattling and re-traumatizing for a survivor. One of the reasons why I think that this is also so prevalent, we are still living very much embedded in a culture where women were usually the victims, but not always. There's other cases where there are men, there are boys that were abused, but women usually, and also children, are usually not believed when it comes to issues of sexual abuse and physical abuse. It is historically, generationally, is embedded in our culture, and it's embedded in every institution and the judicial institution.
That's interesting. And so, since we're sort of talking about what's embedded in the institution, obviously the Jonathan Major verdict was very different than the Depp verdict, right? Johnny Depp was found not guilty. Jonathan Major was found guilty on 2 counts. Do you think that there is any racial element to here? Is there any racial bias? Is, the fact that, the black man who was up against a white woman in court versus a white man and a white woman made a difference for the outcome that we saw?
Well, there is among, discussions both that I saw online, there's discussions that, I have among, my groups, colleagues, peers, and friends, and that's always going to be a point of discussion. We can't hide, we can't get away from, that is the history of our culture. That is the history of our criminal justice system. And to deny it would be a folly. So I definitely think that should be a part of the discussion when we look at that. As a legal practitioner, though, I also have to filter in other factors. I practice personally in the same courthouse where Mr. Majors was tried. So we're talking about a urban courthouse, downtown New York City. I didn't personally see the jury, but as a litigator, we think about our jury pool and where we're trying the case. The jury pools in Manhattan tend to skew to be, more diverse. Not completely, but more diverse because you're in a metropolitan area. So you think about those factors, but that doesn't 100% dismiss or explain away um, unconscious bias. And it's there. It impacts every case. I think about it in every case that I'm bringing on behalf of a client. So I know that will always be a point of discussion. It will always be something that both if you represent a survivor, if you're accused of a crime, and this is especially when we're talking about in the criminal justice system, that you have to think about and you have to consider. Can we point to whether it was a direct factor in this case? Possibly. I'm not going to dismiss it because to do that would be to dismiss the experience of African Americans and to dismiss the experience of people of color with the criminal justice system in America.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that because I wanted to point out that so-called Black TikTok, grabbed onto this case pretty early in. And even before the verdict came out, the majority of the comments that were talking about this sort of had this defeatist tone, like, we know he's going to lose, it's going to happen, we know he's going to lose. And what that kind of says to me is regardless of the case itself, there is this feeling within the Black community or a large swaths of the Black community that there's not going to be a fair shake for Black men. And so I wanted to ask you, how do we fix that? How do we get to the point where not only does the Black community and let's say like historically marginalized communities in the U.S. feel more safe and secure that the justice system is for them, but also how do we move toward that so that's not even just how they feel, but so that it's so? What are your thoughts on that?
I was hopeful, and I continue to be hopeful. I was hopeful in 2020 when we were having a renewed wave of consciousness around issues of race. Or if you're in the African American community, it wasn't a new wave. It was a continuation of something that's been going on for generations. You look along the timeline of the history and the life of African Americans in this country starting in the 1600s, and there's certain demarcations. There's bright lines. Emmett Till was one. George Floyd was another, and a host of others. I'm just bringing out the ones that are, most notable and most talked about. There's thousands of unnamed African American boys, girls, men, and women that also we could bring out. But how do we get to that? In 2020, we were going in the right direction. There was a renewed interest in discussion, in talking about it. And I can't stress how much I believe that that's impactful when we talk about really getting into the issues and the problems in our system. And Black Twitter is highlighting it. It's that defeatist, like, well, we know what's going to happen here. We've seen this before. We don't do any good by receding back into our different corners, be it Black Twitter. Now they're just expressing what we've seen happen over and over again in the criminal justice system. And I can also, I saw that happen representing clients in the criminal justice system. So I can empathize with that. But I know that the only way that we get out of this is if those in positions of authority And I don't care if it's someone at the warden level, at the commissioner level, city government, state government, and national government. We have got to keep the conversation going. We've got to continue to speak to and speak about these little microaggressions and injustices that continue within, and we're focusing now, of course, on the criminal justice system, but it happens whether it's in corporate America. So that's step one. Step two is that we have to be committed to all of us, to our unconscious bias, because they're the things that come about, that we make decisions on, and that that impact so many people around us. The third thing that I think is really important to teasing out, to getting away from repeated behaviors that highlight injustice, is that there has to be a centering away from strictly mainstream cultures, the way things always have been. There has to be a centering away from sensitivities around race. So what that looks like, if you're bringing up a discussion about race, you often hear the term now being used very derogatory, woke. Oh, now this person is woke. Now they're talking about, and it really is this shifting that I see, and this trend that I see, where if you are in a group, whether it's African American, whether you're a survivor of a certain gender, you're highlighting what's happened to you, this pattern, the injustice, the abuse. Now, oh, well, now you're so woke. Well, now you're complaining. Well, now you're a victim. You can't equate continually pointing out something horrible that's happening to you with being victimized, with complaining, because that minimizes. And if we continue on this trend to minimize, whether it's in the context of a survivor, whether it's the context of historically marginalized individuals, African Americans within the criminal justice system, will continue in this pattern. We'll continue to see Black Twitter or different segments of the population really being upset because nothing has changed. And we have to change. It absolutely has to change. If we don't, it will be to the destruction of us all.
Yeah, well, we're out of time, but I heard you say that one of the ways that we can push this forward is make sure that we have more conversations in which we are addressing the issues. So I want to thank you for having this conversation and addressing these, really complex issues with us. Thank you so much, and hopefully we can do this again sometime.
Absolutely, I'd love to. Thank you for having me.